I get to welcome you all here tonight, here at the historic Roxy Theatre in the gorgeous Riversdale District, here on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is our opportunity and also our obligation to consider this project as we move forward as part of our commitment to reconciliation. So, I'm Cynthia Block, and I am the City Councillor for Ward 6, which includes the downtown and areas on the east side of the river near the downtown. I am Council's strategic lead for downtown development, and as such, have been honored to have the opportunity to visit other cities and better understand how large public projects attract private investment and what that means for the overall success of not just downtowns, but the entire city. And so over the last, I'm gonna say 5 or 6 years, though perhaps it's only been in recent times, that we've been hearing a lot about the DEED, the Downtown Event and Entertainment District in Saskatoon. And you know, for whatever folks are thinking about what that's gonna look like, how can it work in our city? That's why we have these experts here tonight, and I can't wait to introduce them to you. But before I do, I wanted to underscore 2 important things that I know are out there, but I'm not sure that everyone has heard that message based on the emails that I'm getting from a lot of residents. So the city has been directed to bring forward a funding plan without burdening property tax. And I'm sure you're wondering, well, how is that even possible? When I told you that I've had an opportunity to visit other cities, I've had an opportunity to research other cities, and I will tell you that the gentlemen you will hear from tonight, know this inside and outside, backwards, forwards, about how cities just like ours, even cold ones, even ones without an NHL franchise, have been able to create districts with very unique funding models. And I'll leave that there for now, but I really wanted to take that opportunity to underscore that piece. And one other piece. So this is a district, not just an arena. And we are calling that an event center because of course it's much more than a sports complex. It's much more than a place for hockey. But I would actually go one step further. It is a much wider angle lens than that facility, much wider angle lens than even the entire district. What the city is up to here is a true city building initiative, trying to make Saskatoon a more efficient city. And the evidence and data shows that if you can drive density to the core of your city, of which these types of districts have been proven to do, you have, maybe it's not the holy grail, it's not the only catalyst to propel our city forward, but it is a significant one. Because as you drive that density to the core, more residential attracts more commercial. And when you do it at the center of your city, where all of the infrastructure and the services already exist, those efficiencies multiply. So, with no further ado, I get to introduce the wonderful panel here this evening. And I will begin by introducing Simon O'Byrne. So for those who don't know, Stantec is an international company working on this project with experts in our local office. They provide professional consulting services in planning, engineering, architecture, interior design, landscape architecture, surveying, environmental scientists, project management, and project economics for infrastructure and facilities projects. They're kind of busy, and they, I think, know a lot about these things. Tonight, we're going to get a chance to hear from Stantec and some of the partners to better understand the whole concept, the evolution and trends of a downtown entertainment district, and how that might work in our own city. So following the presentation, I just wanted to let you know we will have a question and answer session, and so have your questions ready. We'll get to that in a little bit. Simon O'Byrne hails from Alberta and more recently from Vancouver. He's an award-winning urban designer and planner and senior vice president of Stantec's community development business. As a city building expert, he is frequently called on as a keynote speaker at conferences in North America and Europe, and is often quoted in media on both continents. Simon has led multidisciplinary design teams in the planning and successful delivery of large complex projects in Canada, the US, and the UK. And on top of that, he is an active community volunteer, including the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Vibrancy Task Force, Habitat for Humanity National Leadership Council, and Winter Cities. So next is Scott Ralston. Maybe just give us a wave when I introduce. Okay, that was Simon. No one can see you, but that's okay. They'll see you in a little bit. That's Simon. Next, we're going to talk about Scott Ralston. So Scott can give us a wave. There he is. Okay, you got the back of his head. That's awesome. He was born and raised in the southern prairies, in the southern prairie town of Wichita, Kansas, and studied at the University of Kansas. He's been a principal at HOK in Kansas City since 1994. HOK is a global design, architecture, engineering, and planning firm. Some of Scott's notable projects include Nationwide Arena and District in Columbus, Ohio, District Detroit Master Plan and Little Caesars Arena Concept Design, and Rogers Place in Edmonton. And apparently, according to Scott, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to tell you all this, but we're all actually invited up pretty much any weekend to Kansas because he does gravel biking in something called Flint Hills, which is apparently a really big deal. And I'll just warn you now, some of us may take you up on it. Okay. And next we have Brian Tennyson. Welcome, Brian. Brian is a principal with Seattle-based LMN Architects. LMN is an architectural firm specializing in the design of public assembly buildings with more than 60 completed convention center projects in its 43-year history. Brian leads the convention center market sector for LMN and is recognized leader in the programming and planning of convention centers. He has worked with municipalities throughout North America on more than 20 convention center expansions, renovations, new builds, and master plans. And this includes Vancouver and Winnipeg. So, it is now my privilege to introduce to you from Stantec, Mr. Simon O'Byrne.
Thank you very much, Councillor. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Brian, and the rest of our team, we are really privileged to be here today as part of this important city building conversation. As a prairie kid who grew up in Edmonton, and I can tell you it's not a thing that's kind of easy. I moved about a year and a half ago for work reasons to the West Coast. My mortgage in Edmonton was miles too small, so I moved to the West Coast and had an unfortunate zero added to my mortgage. But city building in Vancouver is a lot different than city building in Edmonton. In Vancouver, there's mountains to the north, there's the ocean to the west, protection of ag land to the east, and the US border to the south. So city building's a lot different when the land use economics are distorted by those barriers. And as a result, downtown is almost naturally vibrant no matter what you do because of the land use pressures and the real estate economics. In a city like Edmonton that I grew up in, it doesn't happen naturally. It has to be deliberate, has to be curated. It requires a lot of effort and attention to make the downtown successful because there's a lot of competing pressures. In Edmonton, there's prairie in every single direction around Edmonton, so there's not hard barriers on growth and development. So you have to have different conversations about what does it want to be, and there's a lot of development pressures. I've spent a lot of time in Saskatoon. I've worked here many times, and I've been to other prairie cities, Regina, Winnipeg, and worked in those as well. And in those cities, just like Edmonton, there's not hard pressures on the edges of the city that change the land use economics and the real estate that comes with it. And so decisions are a little different. They require a lot more deliberate thought. One of the things that I really see now in Saskatchewan that's really exciting is that you have a rare phenomena happening, which I don't know if it's happened in Saskatchewan in eons, which is rare earths booming, uranium booming, potash booming, agriculture booming, agricultural process booming, the university booming, the second fastest growing tech sector in Canada as a percentage after Waterloo. You have all these different things. It's very rare to have that many pistons firing all at the same time. But that also gives a wonderful opportunity. As the city is clearly on a trajectory to be 500,000 people, it's at this nexus right now, and it has to decide, what does the city want to look like at 500,000 people? What does Saskatoon at 500,000 people look like? And I don't want to prejudice what the decision is. The decision's not mine. Our job is to come forward with what are best practices for downtowns, what are best practices for arenas and arena districts and convention centers, and what are the do's and don'ts, and try to make it bespoke to Saskatoon. You can say, well, we did this in Edmonton. Well, that's Edmonton. Some things don't transfer well. Some things do transfer well. So what our job is to really kind of bring forward ideas, and it's the community's job, your job, to carry that conversation forward and have conversations with your friends, family, neighbors, with the city of Saskatoon about what you want your city to be. But I can tell you that it has to be deliberately thought about. It has to be curated. And so part of when you think about a downtown, and I don't know what the specific numbers are for Saskatoon, but I can tell you in Edmonton, downtown is only 1% of the land use, but it's 11% of the tax base. So we had a very strong motto in Edmonton, which was, as goes the downtown, so goes the city, because if downtown's successful, that kept everyone's taxes in the suburbs low. Likewise, if downtown was really successful, it helped the brand of the city. It helped us attract and retain people. And if we attracted and retained people in Edmonton, then it also, by nature, then attracted and retained businesses in the city as well. And so it was very kind of deliberate that we kind of wanted to make sure that we had a successful downtown. But that type of city building, the city has done this before in Saskatoon. A generation or more ago, there was a big plebiscite that happened that resulted in Sasktel getting built. And city people getting together in the community and investing in TCU in terms of those two big monumental amenities that were added to the community. So part of this is having a conversation about what does the city, not just the downtown, but the broader city region want to look like in the future. And again, that's not for us to decide, but it's to say what are the best practices. But it's also, I really want everyone to leave the room today saying it's not just about an arena, it's not just about a convention center, it's about city building. And to me, at the end of the day, what it is about the downtown. How do we make the downtown vibrant and successful? How do we make sure that we're not adding hundreds of new people to the downtown, but thousands of people in the downtown? There's 3,500 people living in downtown Saskatoon today. How do we get it tomorrow have 10 or 20,000 people downtown? So there's not a question that there's the market there to be able to support a grocery store and other amenities, and that the scale of vibrancy that some clamor for would be there. And so part of it's a very deliberate conversation. I'm going to be sharing with you a couple images here. We're going to start talking about the evolution of arenas and their place in the city and where they've been. And then we'll go from there to talking about how we've actually built arenas and entertainment districts. How have they come to be? And same thing with convention centers as well. Well, if you look at our patterns as human beings, where did we locate them in the get-go? They were always near our city center. They've always been our city center because that's where we wanted to be, because we've built our transportation models, whether it was Rome or at Saskatoon, with an all roads lead to Rome model. And so it made sense where we had the highest concentration of businesses, where we had the highest concentration of transportation infrastructure, to locate things in the heart of the city. It kind of made sense because there was multiple modes of transportation that was accessible. And so we see cities like Edmonton, which had this is actually before Rogers, we had Northlands, and before Northlands, we had the Edmonton Gardens. Before the Edmonton Gardens, we had the Thistle Rink in downtown Edmonton on 102nd Street. And then Saskatoon did the same with the arena that was in the downtown in 1937. So there's a pattern in terms of what we started to do. And then other cities across North America were doing it as well, whether it's Maple Leaf Gardens, or it was Maple Leaf Gardens, which is still downtown in terms of the new one today, or it's Boston Gardens, which was built at the hub of North Station, where all the transportation infrastructure came in, so that you could both hop on both the subway system, and you could hop on the commuter rail out to the suburbs from North Station. And the Montreal Forum as well. All of these located in the heart of the urban core, where it really kind of made sense to feed off the business community, to feed off the population that was there, to feed off what we had in terms of the scale of infrastructure. Then we had a big pivot. And the big pivot was really what happened in terms of how city building took a hard turn after World War II. We came out of World War II and we embraced across North America modernity. And modernity meant freeways. Modernity meant getting out of the city. And in places like the United States, there was also the phenomena of white flight that happened to people going to the suburbs. That didn't happen in Canada, but we still took the same kind of building form in terms of building freeways and the explosion of population out in the suburbs, because all of a sudden the middle class could afford to buy a car, and they couldn't afford to buy a car in the Depression era unless they're upper middle class. So all of a sudden you had the middle class being able to afford cars. With that came veterans coming in and getting grants and other incentives in Canada and the United States to go to the suburbs. The result was Inglewood and building places like the Forum. It meant places like Winnipeg starting to build them further out of the downtown. And Winnipeg's case, it was built in the Northwest, kind of not too far out for Polo Park, if you know where that is. And so what happened in terms of the city building was, it was kind of built there, and it was done, and the idea was to kind of capture all of the revenue within if it was privately done, it was to capture all of that revenue within the arena. Or in the public's case, it was about building it in the suburbs, because that was the era of city building. Regional malls, all the economic vitality was moving out to the suburbs. Pittsburgh did the same, as did other cities like Northlands here in Edmonton, which built on 75th and Yellowhead. And so that was kind of the era. Everyone kind of got into it, and everyone said, well, this is kind of where we need to be, and this is where cities are locating them. And part of it was about wanting to modernize their facilities and build bigger ones, and not always having the appropriate site within the downtown to be able to easily do that. But you start doing that, but then the trade-off was, then you lose all that economic vitality in the downtown. You know, a very successful, the local arena here on a really good year can get 500,000 people going to it. A large arena that's busy, like the one at Edmonton, can do 1.5 million to 2 million people a year. So you have all that activity that goes on in the downtown, and then you add convention centers and all the other things that are going in, and that adds a lot of people to the downtown. But it's what you're ultimately trying to create in today's era of arenas and convention centers is a 1 + 1 = 3. If it's simply a 1 + 1 = 2, that's not good math. What you want is a 1 + 1 = 3 in terms of city building. And what you want to do at the end of the day is to have thousands of units of housing and have economic vitality. And some of it's going to show up on a ledger and say, if we put these amenities within the core and we make it more pedestrian oriented, and we bring activity to the downtown, and we get more businesses and more restaurants, and we get more housing, that's part of the equation. And we can, economists can capture some of that. But part of it's also about city building in terms of the stories we want to tell ourselves. At the end of the day, culture is the aggregate of all the stories we tell about ourselves internally and externally. And so part of it's about, what do we want the story for the city to be, the story of the downtown, the broader story for the city to be. And then we see places like Kansas that kind of did the same thing. They built another suburban location. Eventually, 10 years ago, they had the idea to do the Power and Light District downtown. And that was one that was city-led, where the city led the charge, and the city assembled a large block of land. I think it was about 6 or 10 blocks in order to be able to facilitate doing that, to help turn around downtown Kansas, which was struggling and was not living up to its potential. The analogy I use about downtown city building and arenas is that it's kind of like having a full-time employee. It's a full-time employee that you're giving benefits to. They got matching RSPs. They maybe got a pension plan. They got full healthcare benefits. You're paying them full-time, but they're only working 15 hours or 20 hours a week. You build all your infrastructure. The cultural amenities are there. The heritage infrastructure is there. And so how do you, knowing you've already you're pregnant, if you will, with all these infrastructure in the downtown. So how do you maximize that? Because as opposed to building new pipes in the edges of the town and new roads on the edge of town, it's already there. It's about, how do you fill it in, and how do you kind of maximize that investment that the city has already built within the downtown? How do you increase the revenue coming into City Hall by investing in that downtown, so that downtown can eat up a large proportion of tax revenue coming into the city. So as opposed to being 10% of the tax base, it could be 15% of the tax base. Those are the sorts of, because you're already kind of pregnant with the infrastructure. So that's a lot of what I want to talk about in terms of a little bit of the legacy. We're going to be a little bit fluid here, but I'm going to pass it to my colleague from the southern part of the Great Plains.
Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to Saskatoon. This is my first week here, and I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for the nice introduction. This is about trends in district, event center, and convention center design and implementation, right? Who here has heard the term or the phrase, if you build it, they will come? I think all of us have heard that, right? I don't know if it originated in the movie, but it gets credited a lot, right? The truth of the matter is, urban planners like Simon and his other team members here, back in the 80s and 90s, already knew that these mid-century built arenas, in some respects were great, but in most respects, it wasn't good for community, right? It really wasn't good for the city. And so there was this trend then, starting in the late 80s, going into the 90s, of let's move these back downtown. And downtowns by this time had a lot of fallow ground, right? A lot of depressed areas, surface parking lots. So it was easy to create land masses to put the new arenas. And they would just drop these arenas or convention centers down. And we're surprised that things didn't rebound in their downtowns. They were deadly. And the truth is, that still happens today, more often than not, which is a sad truth. It's not easy to do convention centers well and arenas well and create districts. It's difficult, okay? And so what we're going to try to show you here now are not the failures, because those are plenty, and we're not going to be here all night. We're going to show you just some nuggets about some of the venues that have succeeded in creating districts and transforming communities, okay? Let's start with the ideas. Okay, these ideas come from planners like Simon. This is what you learn in school. This is what you try hard to practice. This is what city policy follows. All your guidelines and bylaws drive towards these types of things. These diagrams work, okay? The key is, how do you transform your thoughts of arenas and convention centers into that district DNA that we know works for districts? So we're going to go back about 25 years, the planning for Nationwide Arena in the Nationwide Arena District. And this was an outlier then. This was a guaranteed failed project by the operator, okay? Because we were turning the building inside out. We were making the arena part of the community. We were putting windows everywhere. There's daylighting on two sides of the seating bowl. So when you play hockey in there, the sun's shining in. You know, that was anathema to arena design, which were these black box circus tents. Bring people in, empty their pockets, kick them out, right? This was about being friendlier. This is about being community. You know, a fenestrated building, beautiful pedestrian-oriented streets, not just a plaza for programming, but a plaza that is also a little pocket park for those quiet moments in a busy urban area during the day when there's no event. That's the Nationwide Arena District. It's 25 years old now, and it's humming along. And that was transformative for Columbus, for those who haven't been there. Another, in my hometown now, Kansas City, in the Kansas City Power and Light District, bold move by the city to acquire a lot of land for an event center. It's an all-glass building. Wherever you are in that building on any level, you know where you are in the city. This is the city's living room, okay? This is KC Live. This is a partially covered, heated area for the winter and fans turning for the summer to create comfort. This is our gathering place. This is our hometown gathering place. And today it's featured in World Cup events, Super Bowls, and things like that. This is our hometown living room. And it's part of the KC Power and Light District, commercial retail, restaurant, bars, service retail, housing is coming in like crazy in just a decade. And so this was transformative for our hometown. Our downtown, Bill and I were talking about this today, walking through this area here. We're like, this looks exactly like downtown Kansas City. It's exactly what it is. And today it's completely transformed. Winnipeg, near here. Simon, do you want to speak to this?
So Winnipeg's an interesting one because I think a lot of people here are probably familiar with it. Winnipeg's interesting because Winnipeg's a little different in terms of the land use economics as well. It wasn't a fast. Winnipeg's always been the tortoise. It's always been the tortoise and not the hare. It's a slower. It always grows, but it's always kind of slow and steady. And so what's happened in the downtown is that it's not this place that when in the Ice District in Edmonton, when the arena went forward, there was a period of time we had 29 cranes in the downtown core. So it really kind of unlocked a huge amount of potential, and all of a sudden there was development popping up all over the place in downtown Edmonton. Winnipeg's been a lot different. Winnipeg, with the MTS Center, what happened was they built it on the site, and then it was this very kind of slow, kind of incremental change that happened. So when the Jets came, the different ownership, they saw the potential and they saw what was happening elsewhere. So it really started to spur a lot of other investment going in to the downtown. You had the Alt Hotel. In fact, Stantec got involved. Our Winnipeg office is located immediately opposite the MTS Center, and we kind of built it into an Alt Hotel immediately across the street from the MTS. And so that was one of the first development projects that kind of went in. And I can tell you that our decision to where to relocate our office in downtown Winnipeg was heavily influenced by the fact that the MTS Center was there, and then it was kind of becoming the hub of activity in Winnipeg. And so other businesses started following suit. Winnipeg Hydro or Manitoba Hydro that made the investment and put it in terms of a brand new office tower, and then that spurred other development, and then hotels, and now condos, and now purpose-built rental. And now it's starting to get a little bit more. It went from having no inertia to now as inertia to now it's actually at the momentum stage, and there's multiple projects under other fully developed, under construction, are now being planned within a block or two radius of MTS Center. And so the catalyst that really kind of started in Winnipeg was the MTS Center, and that's really become the kind of gravitational heart now of Winnipeg, and it really has kind of changed a lot of what people have seen. And then it wasn't just about the building, it was also about SHED. So SHED was the Sports Hospitality Entertainment District, and creating a whole district around it and trying to be deliberate about it. And when you do a district, it's not just, again, about arena, it's about a whole bunch of small interventions. Some of them people take it for granted, but it's about the type of street furniture you put in, the type of paving materials. It's about the public realm, the public places. It's about the lighting, especially in a winter city where you have a palette of darkness for 6 months. So it gives you this wonderful opportunity to do whimsical things with lighting. And so it was the cumulative effects of hundreds of small to medium-sized interventions in city building that Winnipeg did that, taken together, start making the SHED a really kind of phenomenal area within Winnipeg.
So the last one we'll show you is a little bit recent. It is in Edmonton, Rogers Place and the Ice District there. When we started working on this in 2010, there hadn't been, but for one building, EPCOR, there hadn't been a new tower built in downtown Columbus or Edmonton for 20 years. So what that allowed us to do was remind ourselves that what's the important decision making, and for us, for each community, the outcomes are different, but the process is the same. To identify what you feel like you want and need. And I think Saskatoon's at that point right now. Think about what you want and need. And they wanted a catalyst project in downtown Edmonton, and what they really wanted and felt they needed was a four-season venue, four-season type space for for year-round entertainment downtown. And so they got it, but they got it in the form of two things. Ford Hall, which is their indoor gathering place during periods of poor weather, and when it's really nice, they've got their outdoor gathering place in the plaza on the Ice District. Both are programmed, both are exciting, both are unique in their own ways. And those were just two spaces that are part of the public realm that work well. But as going a little bit back to what Simon was talking about, it isn't just about the arena, it's about everything else. So this arena was specifically designed to accommodate new Grand Hotel, consolidation of city offices, consolidation of corporate offices. These were things that the city felt they needed and they wanted. And so your planning starts to drive towards those wants and needs. So if the city thinks about that, that'll help us as designers help you get that implemented. So I think, we've hammered on district a lot, and I think, for us, the district is where it all starts, and thinking about the district, and the arena or the event center and the convention center will respond to the district needs. That's how we look at it. That's how we view the process. So moving on from district, let's have a little fun and give you a sneak peek on what some of the new arenas are doing. Okay, now these arenas, and I would say probably for convention centers, are unique to their place, okay? And what we try to do wherever we go is to create a great experience for everyone that comes into contact with it, whether they're a ticketed patron going inside or outside. Oops, did I turn the page? What'd I do? I hit the button here. Yeah, we try to create an experience for everyone. So I'm going to walk through what some of those experiences might be, because it's important, and COVID taught us this, right? Comfort and convenience of our home is better now than it's a bigger part of our lives than ever before. And to get, what does it take to attract people downtown? What does it take to attract you out of the comforts of your home to go to an event? And we're fighting that, people in this business. These are important buildings and important amenities for a community, but we've got to get you out of your home. We've got to get you out of your comfort zone in a lot of ways. And that's a challenge for us as designers. We start with connecting these venues to the district, outdoor amenities. We begin to open up these buildings. They become porous. We call it the unconcourse. It's not the racetrack that you have today at Saskatoon. It's the unconcourse. It's a place you want to be. It's more of a market. It's a place where you can see all the options, and there are many options. The unconcourse may be a street. This is in Detroit, right? This is not your conventional old school arena concourse. Cultural immersion. This gets to what's right for you here in Saskatoon. This is an example in Edmonton, and we do this wherever we go around North America. Here you have, not just the snow. You can see the snow and the drifts. And when we flew in here, when Bill flew in here yesterday, he said, you would not believe how white this country is, right? And we noticed that too years ago. And so the Winter Garden takes on the image of snow. Indigenous relations were important in this process. Public art. Alex Janvier is a wonderful artist and did a great painting, Essence of Tree, and it became a mosaic in the center of Fort Hall. So these are all things that we implemented for this particular project that are unique to Edmonton. So what is unique to Saskatoon? And as part of this process, we will begin to seek some of those out. Local and authentic. This is also cultural immersion. This is in Atlanta. Zach Brown, who hasn't heard of him, he may have played here, I don't know. A club in the arena designed and curated by Zach Brown. How cool is that? That's his hometown. He brags about it. He plays there all the time, and he has his own place there. And his fans, whether they're going to a basketball game or something else, can touch Zach Brown every day. Killer Mike, same thing. The Killer Mike swag shop and barber shop. Super unique to Atlanta. A super cool amenity in that building. Can you imagine being that person, getting their hair cut, watching that game? All right? It only happens in Atlanta. Okay? Now, these are the things that we have to do, not have to do, but these are things we want to do for a community, because this represents your community. This is part of it. So all those mid-century buildings you saw that dropped down, they were all the same. They're all cut from the same cookie cutter. We don't do that anymore. So the objective here is for us to figure out with you and with your input what's right for you. And not just for today, but we will cover all those things like flexibility that'll allow this building to go for 50 years. Food and beverage services aren't what they used to be. You can still get hot dogs and popcorn, but there's so much more. That's got to be the world's biggest Airstream, the coolest food truck, and it's done there on purpose because it'll follow the trends of people's, likes. Food is a trendy thing, right? And so You create these great spaces and you build them out so that they can go, move and morph with the times. Hospitality, even hospitality is unique. Every saddle there is different, right? So, it's just cool. It's unique. And this is special. This is in Phoenix. Bill, I think, designed this. Yeah. Bill knows more about it than I do. Great food, you can expect it. Great service, you can expect it. And great presentation, you can expect that too. That's the trend. That's where these venues need to be, because that's what it takes to get you out of your home and get you downtown and wishing you lived downtown. Because that's the ultimate goal, to be rebuilding your downtown, creating a district and rebuilding your downtown. Got to have some fun. Behind the scenes is always good, right? I'd want to be one of those kids. Who doesn't want to go back in time and high-five the players coming through the tunnel? These venues are for everybody. Nobody's excluded. A lot of pride goes into, everything that goes into this building keeps everybody in mind. There are going to be a lot of breakout sessions about this. And then one thing about, we want to talk a little bit about the seating bowl. That's a term that we use in our business. It's where you sit. It's a bowl like your cereal bowl. We call it a seating bowl. It's not a common term, I suppose. This happens to be Sprint Center in Kansas City, or T-Mobile Center now. They're flexible buildings, but if you were to, for those of you who've been to Saskatoon, you may see some key difference here. First is, look how large that lower bowl is. It's huge compared to what you have at Saskatoon. That's a trend. More people down closer to the event. Look how small the upper deck is, like a ribbon. It's really small. So the nosebleed seats are reduced. The better seats in the lower bowl are increasing. That's a trend in the market. And then if you look on the opposite side of the court, you'll see just a wall of seats. And that's important for the entertainers that come through your city. People don't often think about their lives, the people that get on stage and put on these shows, go all over the world. Their joy, their art is their joy. They want to play to a wall of people. And so we're giving them a wall of people, right? That's the objective, because they need to have a great experience too, or they're not going to come back. So that's a huge trend in this arena business right now. Two other seating bowls here. This one's in Detroit. There's kind of two different directions. This is a really steep bowl, very intimate. It's got vomitories or portals that punch through the lower bowl and the upper bowl to get you to your seat. It's very enclosed, intimidating. Concert people love it because it's just a wall of sound and a wall of people. Edmonton's the opposite. This is the majority trend right now of these buildings, okay? Probably 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 buildings that are built are more along the Edmonton model, with a little bit shallower rake in the lower bowl that's open to the main concourse. Premium level seating that's open to lounge space behind, and upper concourses that are open to the bowls. People don't always want to just sit in their chair, right? It's not like that anymore. It's very different. So we call that orchestrating the seating bowl. We've got 2 levels of suites here. The lower level's the veranda, okay? It's a box, but if you look in it, it's like your living room or your kitchen. It's got an island, and everybody gathers around the island, and then they can step out on the veranda and watch the game, right, from a seat. Up above that are the lofts. The lofts are, they're demised, they're separated, but behind you is one big loft. Think about just walking into a Soho building, and it's one big art space. This is one big lounge. So it's a communal setting for your suite holders, right? People want to see and be seen and meet and greet all around. And so the way the suites go, it's different. So the seating bowl is just different. We orchestrate the seating bowl to match the demands and needs and wants of your city. Fan mobility. People want to be able to move around. Not everybody wants to just take their ticket, go to their seat, sit there all game, and leave. People want to lounge around. This space right here, I don't know the exact numbers, Bill, but they probably sell 18 tickets for 12 seats. And everybody's just hanging out. And that's the trend. right? That's the trend. That's how, when you invite people over for hockey games or live concerts that are televised, that's how you do it at your home. That's how you do it now in arenas. View bars, opening up the seating bowl. This is a bar down on the floor in Atlanta. It's a really unique experience. Terrace tables, they've been around for a while. They're still really popular. And loge boxes. So this is, some of the fan experiences that you might expect. These are the things that we're going to be exploring and working with the city and with the folks that are going to be running the arena. We're going to be making sure that the building is a machine. Saskatel's not necessarily a machine today as we would think of it. It's not easy to transform the building from hockey to lacrosse or lacrosse to concert. It's difficult, it's hard, it's time consuming, it's expensive. So these buildings are more of a machine today. We're going to be able to do a 3/4 house, half house, quarter house for as little as 2,500 or 3,000 people. It's going to feel great. Up to a full house, 16 to 18,000 people. It's going to feel great. Of course, we'll cover hockey, lacrosse, trade shows maybe, and your rodeo and dirt shows. So it's going to have all those amenities, all those opportunities. The building's a machine, and it's going to last 50 years. That's the objective. So that's a little bit about districts and arenas from our perspective. And Brian, I think you're up.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for being here and caring about your city. It's my pleasure to speak with you about convention centers and theaters. You're going to hear many of the same themes as where convention centers and theaters are today. Mainly, it's no longer just about the building. It's about how the building performs and integrates within the community and supports a vibrant urban district. But they weren't always that way. So I'm going to step back a little bit just to show you how they used to be approached. They were thought of as very segmented buildings. So you had three main spaces: exhibit hall, ballroom, meeting rooms. You had pre-function that served those, and there was not a lot of integration or interaction between those. And these were single-use spaces, and that spoke to how events occurred at that time. It led to buildings that were very inwardly focused, not a lot of windows. It also spoke to how delegates interacted with the content. 25, 30 years ago, it was more about sitting in your seats, unfortunately, like you are doing now, and just consuming or absorbing content. That's not what delegates today, that's not how they want to experience their meetings. We've moved on from that model. We've moved to more flexible venues where you can have different types of different types of events in multiple spaces. So high degree of flexibility, high degree of interaction. And what's driving a lot of this is the delegates aren't interested in just sitting and consuming, absorbing content. They want to actually be a part of creating that content and being more involved in the event. And you heard Scott speak to opening up these buildings. Convention centers are no different, opening up to daylight and views. Nobody wants to be in a solid box anymore. And that's led to really designing centers that that are a connection to place. This is Vancouver. We wouldn't design this building in any other city. It's about the place. It needs to respond to what is unique about Vancouver. And that's led to, this movement of destination design. And what delegates are really interested in is this idea of an authentic experience of place. That when they come to Saskatoon, they want to experience what it is about Saskatoon. And these examples here, Spokane, for example, Spokane, Washington, you're right there at the Spokane River. That's what that city is about. You can't miss experiencing that piece of the city. This idea of flexibility has also led to how we think about the different rooms. So ballrooms are more of these multi-event spaces where you can have anything from a theater type seating event to a Cirque du Soleil to a dancing competition and dozens of other events, anything that the event manager can think of. But they also, with that flexibility, they need to be nimble. They need to be able to switch over quickly from one event to another to save on labor costs. Meeting rooms are no different. They still need to be rooms where you can sit and listen to an event, but they also need to be maybe little cafes that's shown in the middle there, or a special nightclub type space on the end over there. Same meeting room, serving multiple functions and being way more efficient and highly utilized than under a single use here on my right. Pre-function spaces, I don't know how many of you have gone to convention centers, but if you went to a convention 20 or so years ago, there was not a lot happening in the pre-function space. They were somewhat narrow. Now they are wide open spaces and that are always active. There could be comfortable lounges for networking, impromptu meetings, or it could be what's called open space learning, where they actually have sessions in small, a dozen or so people, little meetings that occur in the pre-function where all the daylight is and more comfortable furniture. And that degree of flexibility has continued to evolve into what we call the flex hall. So think of it as about one room that can do anything. And so no longer is the type of room determined what event can go in there. It's the size of the group and the event that they want to have. What room will they fit in? And you create multiple rooms that can do multiple things. Winnipeg is a good example of that. This is their city room. It's a 40,000 square foot room shown here in banquet mode. Windows on either side. It helps express the city to the delegates inside, but also to the city expresses the event happening inside. So it's very active and very transparent. And it's one of their main rooms. They can do anything in there. The venue love it. Their customers love it. And this is the space they want to be in, whether it's meeting, eating, or exhibiting. And the further evolution of that, and I mentioned community integration and something we call porosity. And again, it's not about the building, it's how well the building integrates with the life of the community. And these can be multiple mixed-use components, retail that allow the buildings not to be just for those from out of town, but providing something to the community that allows more interaction with the neighborhood it sits in, whether there's an event happening there during the day or there's not an event. Cleveland is a good example. Here the exhibit hall, it's a couple, 300 square feet, 200,000 square feet. It's below grade. So above grade is a mall. It's a city park. It's a great amenity that has helped drive the number of, the growth in downtown residential units since it opened in the early teens. They can have convention events on here. They can have very large public events. And for you NBA basketball fans, when LeBron won the championship, there was, I don't know how many thousands of people on this lawn, but you couldn't see any grass. It really became the heart of that community where everybody was able to gather and celebrate that championship. So with this role of convention centers in communities, there's something we like to call civic duty. What are the convention centers giving back to the community? And here's an example in New Orleans. The small picture is the existing. If you've ever been, it's a very long building. It's about a half a mile long. When you walk along the outside previous, there's like 6 lanes of traffic and maybe a 7 or 8 foot wide sidewalk. Not a very pedestrian-friendly, welcoming environment for people that visited, nor people that lived there. So they put the road on a diet, got rid of 3 lanes of traffic, and created what they call the linear park here, which helps really soften the connection of the convention center to the adjacent warehouse district, provides a much better experience for those visiting from out of town, and for those living there, it's a public park that goes a half mile long with seating, lawn spaces, and so forth. This example in Halifax, when they built the convention center, if you go back on Google Earth and the older images, you'll see it was Argyle Street was just derelict. There was old buildings, the ones on the left here, before the convention center was built. The convention center built, surprisingly, not surprisingly, lots of bars and restaurants moved in next door. They created a convertible street called a Wunurf that can be closed off, as you can see, for special events. That could be city events, city festivals, or they sometimes shut it down, and groups have bought out all the restaurants across the street, and they have kind of a curated pub crawl. Again, benefiting more than just the convention center, but also benefiting the community and trying to give those delegates, those visitors, a more authentic experience. In this case, is what Halifax has to offer. We're seeing a push from really vehicular-centric attitude around convention centers to more pedestrian-centric. There's a lot of different examples that we've done where we've converted these massive drop-off areas to more pedestrian-friendly. Here is a smaller project, not too much bigger than what you have here at TCU Place, where again the smaller picture is existing. That round thing was a sculpture we called the tomato cage, but around it was this little drop-off. So that was the delegates and the visitors' experience. You know, dodge the cars on your way to the front door. It's never a good idea. So as we're renovating it, all that gets cleared out and becomes much more of an opening, welcoming pedestrian plaza. Again, moving away from vehicular-centric more towards pedestrian-centric. And then a really recent example from where I'm from, just opened about a month ago in Seattle, Washington, is a really good example, much different scale than what we're talking about here, but many of the same processes we went through to how to best integrate a convention center, in this case over 1 million gross square feet, in an urban site, very dense urban environment. And going back, if you see the orange building there, that was a project that was an expansion in 2001. And part of that expansion included mixed-use development. So there was a hotel tower that was built with that project at the same time, along with an office tower. The most recent expansion, the addition, is in the beautiful lime green there. And that also had 2 co-development towers built as part of that. Which again, you're taking advantage of the value, in this case, of a very dense downtown, of the real estate, maximizing the economic benefit. So it's a stacked high-rise convention center. In the middle there is the stacked program of the convention center. It's about 6 floors of event space, all connected internally by an atrium, brings daylight to every level in the room, but it also provides views out to the city as well. And we refer to this as the heat map diagram. So everything that's kind of orange and yellow in this diagram is pedestrian activities, retail, lobbies, and where the red dashes are, those were empty lots for the convention center. So again, our task was, how do we not just plop a building here? Because the building, again, needs to relate and support and help grow the vitality of the urban district. So by heat mapping all the activity around the site, we're able to then be very much intentional about the types of retail, the locations, the sizes, to best not create a dead zone, if you will, in an urban core, where you've got lots of shops, and then you go by blank walls. You know, that was the intent here, was keep that urban flow, keep the activity. So here you see a couple of images. The 9th Street Market, that's actually an entrance to the convention center. You know, it looks very retail oriented, because it is, because you enter through those retail establishments and you get to what's the middle diagram there, we call the mixing zone. That's both public and private. So the delegates attending a convention, the public can mix in there and have access to that 9th Street Market. And then the retail walk-ups there on the far end are much smaller, little grab-and-go type retail, again, trying to meet a lot of needs in that urban district. So here's a couple projects from more recently when it opened. The mixing zone there in the far picture. The near picture to me is, again, that transparent, more outward-facing, expressing the city that you're in from inside the convention center. So, you know, that's really delivering a high-rise, highly integrated urban convention center in a downtown core. which is going to be a similar challenge that we'll have here in Saskatoon, but on a much smaller scale. So that's convention centers. I'm going to talk through theaters, and in theaters I'm going to talk through about really what we think about when we're designing theaters. And again, you'll see a lot of common themes about how they relate to community and how they open up to and represent the community that it sits in. So first and foremost, it's about it's the performance, and it's about that connection that the audience has to the performer. That has to be special. That has to be memorable, and a room that really creates those memories and has people wanting to come back. And as Scott said, not watch something from home, recorded, but get out and really experience the live performance. One example in Seattle. This is the Seattle Opera House, and traditionally, the arts. There was a much narrower population that would go to the arts, right? So you'd see people dressed up going into these fancy buildings, but you had no sense and no expression of what was happening in that building outside. So this project was very intentional about breaking that box and bringing that performance to the community. So you can see the row of arches there. That's actually an entryway into Seattle Center, which is a big amenity on the edge of downtown Seattle, park amenity. And that space is a public space, but it's also the entry for the theater. And whether there's an event in there or not, there's an art installation that blends colors on those screens that are on those brackets. So again, bringing that performance out into the community and not making it such an exclusive type of experience. And that's, again, another opportunity to create unique experiences, again, whether you're attending an event or not. Similar to convention centers, similar to arenas, flexibility is key. This is the Tobin Center for the Performing Arts in San Antonio, Texas. Their goal with this project was they wanted a performance center theater complex that gave meaningful experiences to everyone in the community. So in order to do that, it had to be incredibly flexible. So the lighting system, highly flexible. You can see the decorative lighting. You can brand an event that's in there through the LED color changing lights. The acoustics are adjustable depending on the types of event that's in there. And the floor is adjustable. So it has in its normal configuration a raked floor like this, but can also pop up and be a flat floor, so they can have multiple different types of events depending on the need. It also increases their utilization tremendously. And this is really, again, speaking to that demographic shift in the audience, trying to be more things to more people, and giving it an ability to evolve as events evolve, creating this highly flexible venue. And as I mentioned before, again, providing an opportunity for multiple people to experience an event here. Some crossover. So this is with the floor in its flat configuration extending to the stage, and they can have a banquet here. So this could be, thought of as a gala event that they're able to hold in the Symphony Hall. And similar to convention centers, arenas, it's about connecting to place. So that same building is right on this San Antonio Riverwalk, which is iconic to that city. It connects via a series of plazas and stepped public spaces, and really becomes part of the urban framework of that city, opening up to, again, events, whether it be public festivals, yoga in the park for the community that lives close by, or just the general public being able to use the space. Very important in theater design today is being inclusive to that community. Again, being something for everybody. Making sure and recognizing that not all cultures experience a theatrical performance in this traditional way, right? So providing an opportunity for that building to flex, to be not a traditional format. Also, a big push for educational opportunities, reaching out to underserved communities, and really being able to introduce the arts to more people and make it part of that community, how that community relates to its arts. Technology is huge in all these buildings. This is a experimental performance space. It's called Octave 9 in the Orchestra Hall in Seattle. It's part of, again, trying to appeal to that new generation of performers and providing a space that's experimental. There's what's called a Meyer sound system in here along with the immersive video. And the Meyer sound system can create anything from acoustics in a huge empty barn or a very quiet room. So you can kind of experiment with how you play in that room. So it can be used, and technology can be used again for augmenting a performance, for enhancing a performance, whether it be through very intense video involvement that makes, again, appealing to a new demographic of users. But key to all this is very robust technology. Thank you for your time.
Just before we get going on the Q&A, I believe some of my colleagues are in the audience tonight. Councillor Lowen, I believe, is here. Marin Lowen, just to give us a wave. Yeah, there she is. Councillor Hilary Goff is here, Ward 2. Hi there. And I believe Councillor Curtin is here. Wait a minute, I see him right there. Hi, Councillor Curtin. And is there anyone else? Did I miss anyone? Any other elected officials in the room? And I'll give a shout out. We have an advisor group. I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but the local advisor group that's sort of the, not the world-class expertise from elsewhere, but our own in-house knowledge, people in our community that are helping to coach us through this. I know there's a few members. If you could just stand, we just really very much appreciate all your volunteer time that you're giving to this project. So thank you very much. Thank you. So there's a microphone in that corner. That's the microphone to go to if you want to ask a question. And I'll just kick us off. I have a burning question, because you started off by saying there's no magic recipe. And there's lots of examples out there where things didn't work out. And you've now shown us, I think, some examples of why things work in other areas. But I'm not sure that I had full clarity about that. Is it about understanding who you are and using that? Is that part of? Is there a secret recipe? That is my question.
Well, I don't know if there's not a silver bullet. I would say that I think the ultimate measure of success with doing it is, at the end of the day, what we want to get to is a vibrant, successful place. In a vibrant, successful place, what is vibrancy at the end of the day? It's about people. And we want to have a lot of people that visit there, a lot of people that live there. And what we'd love to get to in terms of the arena districts and these portions of downtowns that have different amenities, whether it's arenas, convention centers, theaters, etc., is that ultimately they're worthy of people's affection. So part of city building is, what would it take to create a place that would be worthy of people's affection, not just today, but 10 or 20 years from now? And that's kind of the litmus test that what we want to get to. Is it worthy of that? And really part of that comes from not just doing one project or two or three, but about the cumulative effects of a whole bunch of different projects. And part of it also is about giving social license to the community to be experimental. During COVID, we saw all kinds of cities experiment with closing down streets and putting up temporary barriers. We saw parklets and parking being taken away so that restaurants and retailers could go where parking was previously located. We saw patios where there weren't any patios before, impromptu parks that were located when we had to do everything outside during COVID, and we gave people the social permission to do that. In many cases, in New York City and all kinds of places, you weren't even allowed to do that, and they basically, the city threw out the rule book to permit people to do that sort of thing. And we saw that we had maybe over-regulated space, and to the point of not allowing the freedom and creativity from the arts communities, from restaurateurs, from different people within the community with all kinds of whimsical, creative ideas on what could happen in space. And so a lot of it's not just doing these, heroic investments. It's also about allowing for, to me, in terms of the most successful districts are ones that have so many different things going on, and it's about all these different things: places where you can walk your dog, places where you can experience water and arts and so forth. So so those are, but to get to that outcome of having thousands of people living there, thousands of visitors, worthy of people's affection, is really about not one thing, but it's about maybe that one thing was a catalyst that kind of gave it inertia. And then the momentum is really unlocking the hundreds of small to medium-sized interventions.
So you may notice there's an empty chair here because I messed up. So we have another person who's going to join us on stage, and at least in our city world, as we are moving along this project, he is absolutely indispensable and key to everything we do. Please welcome the project manager, Mr. Dan Willems. So Dan is the head of technical services, which is a fancy word for he literally is in charge of everything. And we put a lot on him. So it's not just figuring out what we're doing with the technical pieces around this. It's also trying to implement a modern transportation system with BRT. It's trying to figure out parking and a whole host of other things, and much of what has been mentioned here about what does our community want to see. And we'll be hearing a lot more about that, and a lot of this is on Dan's plate. So with that, I will now turn it over to the Q&A. Does anyone want to answer further with regards to the previous question? Okay. Anyways, my apologies.
Yeah, just real quick, these buildings are not a product, and I think where we've seen these projects not be as successful is when you think of them as a product. I want an arena, I want a convention center, et cetera. It is about a process of integrating that building into the community. And I don't know if it's a secret sauce, but it's been a successful process that we've gone through in multiple cities.
Very good. Go ahead.
Hi, John Naylor. You talked a lot about convention centers, and so and you talked a lot about catalysts and secret sources. When I think of successful convention centers, they typically leverage some existing entertainment structure. I'm thinking a big sports team, a big entertainment thing like Bourbon Street or Vegas or Disney, all those sorts of things. None of those really exist here. And the other trend that I see is people don't go to conventions as much. Like I Zoom. I mean, I go to the local ones to see the local people, but if I want international high quality experience, I would Zoom to it. So how are those two things going to work in our particular situation?
Not every city's Vegas, not every city's New Orleans, but it doesn't mean cities don't have something to offer. And the meeting and events industry is a very broad industry. The number of associations, the types of people that use convention centers, it's not about an arena, and pardon my simplicity here, it's not about just do you have a team to fill the arena. With convention centers, you have hundreds and hundreds of potential teams, meeting events. Targeting the right group is what the TCU Place team's all about. And they work very hard to figure out what types of groups want to come to Saskatoon and can. And for some groups, it is, I'll contradict myself a little bit, it's not always about the place. It's about can you meet the needs of my group. They're more successful when they're about the place and they come to Saskatoon and they go, wow, I had no idea this is such a cool city. And then they want to come back. So meetings, local meetings is one part of the business, but it's not the main goal of the convention center. Convention centers typically look to book groups that are out of region. So there's a term, heads and beds. So you want to bring people from out of your community, so they bring in the dollars. They stay in your hotels, they stay in your restaurants. And those types of events typically book out anywhere from 12 to 18 months in advance. And then those events that are less than 12 months tend to be more the local events that if you live in Saskatoon might appeal to you or might not. So I don't know if that's answered your question. And feel free to follow up if I did not.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I look at TCU Place and I look at, the big acts that come, and it's often not full. Which, to me is a concern, I guess.
Yeah, and kind of one of the weird things about this industry, and Matt, nod at me if I'm way off on this, but a successful convention center is full just over 50% of the time. Depending on the size of show that comes in, there's a day or more to load in that group, and then the group arrives, and that event might be 1 or 2 days. It might be a small group that takes a portion of the facility. It might be a very large group that takes the entire facility. That show ends, they may take a day or two to then move out. So just because you're not seeing the building active every day doesn't mean it's not successful from a convention center. Now, what I spoke to earlier, convention centers aren't just about the building itself, because we don't want you to walk by TCU Place or any convention center on what we call a dark day when there's not an event happening and have it be a dead zone in your downtown. So that's where we talk about this idea of how do you make the building more porous and more integrated with the community. It has to have components that aren't just about the convention center. So obviously retail is a good one. That's taken a hit post-COVID, but we're seeing it come back. What are the other community uses that can utilize this building when there's not an event in town? But I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's something that is always top of mind for the folks that run that center, because they don't want it sitting empty either.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation so far. One question that came up for me when you were talking about the trends with event districts and arenas was about the long-term viability of these places. You're talking about like the growth of Saskatoon, and I think, we bring the arena downtown, and then say we get an NHL team all of a sudden and we need a bigger arena, or no one watches hockey anymore, all of a sudden we're getting a basketball team or something like that. Like how, obviously we've had the other arena for 50 years and now we're saying it's falling apart. How do we build something that lasts longer than 50 years and is not gonna die out? Like what materials science trends have happened since other arenas have been built that mean we can, like a place can evolve and last longer than 50 years, is my question. Does that make sense?
I think part of it is about adaptability and flexibility. And I think as we showed with some of the earliest images of the arenas that were boxes, and then the evolution of them when they started going to the suburbs, I think the best ones today have the ability and the means to have more adaptability and flexibility in terms of use and patterns. So some of them are not built with some are very purpose-built, and they've got an NBA team, an NHL team, an AHL team in mind, and are kind of bespoke to that in terms of the rake of the seating bowl, in terms of the who tends to go there, and then other ones are not even built. They're built to accommodate sports, but Kansas City, for example, doesn't have a professional sports team, so it's one that maybe concentrates more than others on when all those other venues are also constantly packed with sports activity. The Kansas City, for example, gets to cater a lot more to the concert market, and so it can go to different, Live Nation and some of the different promoters out there, and on offer way more nights in a year that are available for concerts than another venue. So part of it is that it's Scott knows way more about this than I do, and I'll pass the microphone to him in a second. But part of it to me is about two things: what happens inside the building and what happens outside the building. And he's expert on the inside of the building, well, both. But the outside of the building to me is also part of it, which is, are you building it so that if you, like Brian just said with convention centers, are you building it so that it's walled to the community, or are you building it so it's integrated into the community, so that there's opportunities for retail, there's opportunities for activity at street level, there's spaces that could be used for things other than parking or other things adjacent to the arena. So can you make it an integral part of the community, and can you do that well? And that to me is that's the challenge. And I don't think anyone's got it perfectly figured out. And I think it's something that's happening in progress. But there's an evolution, like we've spoken to in this presentation, in terms of where arenas were and where they're at today and where we believe they're going to tomorrow.
I'll add just a couple things. The way we live today and the way we work today is very different than 50 years ago. If you think about it, labor was cheap 50 years ago. It's not as cheap now. Look at all the labor challenges we're having now through almost every sector of our life. These buildings have to respond to, they have to be more efficient. They have to be easier to use. They have to be more of a machine for the operators because of labor. Technology has changed a lot. Automation's important. Being able to control the whole building from an iPad is important. So integration of technology has been huge, has meant for huge change in the design of these buildings. And the third thing I would add is, we're thinking a lot more about the environment, right? Sustainable design is very important. And so we've got a lot of venues throughout the world, North America in particular, that are tired old buildings, and they're not able to adapt anymore. So the real question is, are we designing a 50-year building in Saskatoon, or a 75-year building, or a 100-year building? We try hard to build something that'll last as long as it possibly can in our business, okay? But none of us have the perfect crystal ball, and it's a moving target, but we try hard. We know labor is going to continue to become, and is going to stay an issue, right? Technology's only you can imagine what technology is going to do for us. So we use terms like adaptability and flexibility, and we do things that are intentional. And much more today than when I started in this career, we do think long-term. We take a long-term view, and this is hard. This is going to be hard for Dan, managing this project, because, we're going to be given a budget, and we're going to say, another little investment will buy you more flexibility, more adaptability, and it's going to put your city in a difficult position. You're not alone. Every project, whether it's a hospital, a school, a theater, they all face the same things right now. So it's a balance, and again, as design professionals, as technical advisors, we will share with you everything we know. We'll bring in other experts, and ultimately your community will be making those decisions. So we'll come back in 50 years and see how we have done, right?
I'd just add as well, to your point, Scott, about the changing technology and then the needs and the demands and the market and whatever's changing, and the ability of the facility to react to what not just the concert goers or the event attendees are looking for an experience, but also what the performers and the sports teams and everything like that are looking for. It's not uncommon at all to renovate. Madison Square Garden being a great example. I don't know when it was originally built, Scott. You might know off the top of your head, but if you're in a location that's successful, you're not going to avoid the need over time to invest in your facility. The question the decision City Council made back in 2018 was that the new arena would go downtown. And so that's why we're looking at this investment and exploring what that looks like. How are we going to fund it? What's it going to be? And we're excited to be kicking off all this work here. But once it's located if it is built in the downtown, I think the conversation 30 years, 40 years, 50, or hopefully longer about reinvestment and the need for renovations will be around renovation and not knock down and replace or build new. That makes sense.
Yep. It does.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steph Klopchuk, and I'm here on behalf of the local tourism organization, our destination management and marketing organization. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Saskatoon. A couple of questions from me. The first one being related to the infrastructure itself and the community ambassadorship that is required for this project to move forward. I certainly appreciate seeing members of the general public here, curious to understand how this is going to impact their community. Can you share any examples with us in the audience today about projects that have moved forward and initiatives that have involved the community? I just heard what you said there, the community is going to have this input. That seems to be one of the most prevalent things that we hear right now. How is my voice going to be heard? Is there been any instances or projects that you've been involved in where you've seen great ambassadorship or the community come together in specific ways that might help us in the room to really go home, go back into our networks and say, okay, it's time to get our heads and hearts wrapped around this project?
I think we've all had different experiences with it. I can speak to my own experience down the road in Edmonton, which was, one of the great things about living in a democracy is that there's a chorus of opinions and stakeholders and a great diversity of opinion, especially when it comes to capital works and building new infrastructure or building new arenas or other major investments, and the fear that comes from it, the anxiety that comes from it, and also on the other end of the spectrum, the excitement that comes from it and the hope that comes from it. And when we've done engagement with the community and you have the diversity of opinions, one of the things that's really kind of been important, at least in the Edmonton one, was we had, and I think there's some parallels, which is the downtown arena for Rogers was immediately adjacent to the area where we have the highest concentration of homeless people. And the homeless population, unfortunately, is also disproportionately Indigenous and Métis, 60-70% of the homeless population in Edmonton. And that's a factor, the fact that Edmonton, within no place in Canada had a higher concentration of residential schools in Canada than Edmonton. So within 150 kilometers of Edmonton was the highest concentration of residential schools. And I think most of us now in Canada well understand the horrors that happen at many residential schools and that multi-generational trauma that's now in our community and will be in our community for a long time to come. So it was very important that we're very mindful of not just appealing to the people that could afford to buy, a $5,000 Edmonton Oilers season ticket, but somebody that was unimaginable to even go to a game. And so we did a lot of community outreach, a lot of open houses, a lot of online to reach different demographics. We had conversations about community benefits, a lot of conversations about reconciliation, and a lot of engagement with elders, a lot of engagement with the people that work with the vulnerable population as well, in terms of how do we find some opportunities for jobs for people, how do we communicate with people. So we went to the Bizzle and the Hope Center, which are two of the more famous homeless shelters in Edmonton. Actually, we did public consultation engagement actually at the homeless shelters, and we got a chance to meet some of the community there and ask them questions and engage with them as well. And even things like public safety came up. So, for example, somebody who lives in the suburbs and they're leaving the ICE district, and they're kind of leaving quickly in a fancy car, but there's somebody who's maybe got substance abuses, and making sure we think about even public safety getting to and from somebody who maybe is crossing the street and not paying attention to the lights. We thought about all those sorts of things, and all those level of the details we had to kind of get into, and we wouldn't have, and quite frankly, those kind of public safety issues, I think, had we not talked to the community, had we not had those conversations when we got into the details of designing the district, I don't think we would have thought about public safety in terms of somebody who just willingly doesn't, pushing a shopping cart blindly across the street regardless of traffic. I don't think we would have had those conversations. So then it impacted how we had conversations about movement to and from the site and egress and things like that. It also influenced then our public art decisions. We had 1% of the budget go towards public art. So we had a big investment in public art that went in Ford Hall, but then there's other public art that went on other aspects of the district as well, to kind of pay homage to the fact that we're on Treaty 6 land, and the Dakota Sioux and the Dene and the Métis and the Cree people and the Blackfoot that kind of disproportionately populate the Edmonton area. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and I think with projects like this, there's not a conversation, but there's multiple conversations, and also has to be an iterative conversation. It's not just one and done. You have to continually have conversations and learn from the process, and kind of go back and have new ones as well.
One last question from me. I really appreciate the conversation around sustainability, and what you're saying about longevity. Here in Saskatchewan, the tourism sector, especially business events and meetings and conventions, is the 4th largest export industry. And what we're finding, in order for us to maintain the vitality in that industry, is to implement regenerative practices and sustainability practices. And is there any examples of projects like this, districts like this, where you've really seen a demonstrable impact on the community, not just from the economics, but a creation of a circular economy throughout the project that enables induced or indirect impacts in the community that are measurable, that can be communicated above and beyond just the economic impact of hosting these kinds of events in these spaces?
This may not be a direct answer to your question, but I'll give it a shot. So I showed the Cleveland Convention Center. I think one of the indirect benefits from that project, so if you're familiar with urban planning going way back, Daniel Burnham, he did a bunch of big city plans. You'll be very familiar. Yes, and he also did a city plan for Cleveland, the turn of 2 centuries ago, late 1800s. And it became the Daniel Burnham Mall. And it was really how the downtown Cleveland was structured. So fast forward to when we were working on the project, that mall was a public park, but it was very underutilized. And it was underutilized because it was never really updated to how we use parks today. It was very formal. It wasn't as accessible. And at some point, they ended up putting the convention center beneath it, which was failing. So a big part of our job was to, instead of building a new convention center somewhere else, is keeping it in the heart of downtown Cleveland and keeping that, we called it the bathtub, the depressed structure, and then completely rebuilding the Burnham Mall over top of the new convention center space. So, the most sustainable building is the one, that you can reuse, right? So from a sustainability standpoint, it was a win because they didn't have to acquire space somewhere else. But it was more so for the community. And you mentioned beyond economic benefit, but that is a huge piece of downtowns. And I think the Chillicothe, or I butchered that name, but the county that Cleveland is within, along with the city of Cleveland, I think their investment was $460 million for that project. Within, I think, the 4 years after it was completed, there was on the books over $4 billion worth of development around. And all of a sudden, the number of residential units started increasing around, because all of a sudden there was a there. And that added to a lot of civic pride, which, if you know anything about the history of Cleveland, their river caught on fire. So, now they have a space that they can be very proud of, and that has been a huge success for their community.
Just one other example, and then one hopefully optimistic comment. Regenerative, right? So Nationwide Arena in the Nationwide Arena District, McPherson Commons Park, at the head of which was a Daniel Burnham Arch, which was moved from the old train station. It pointed towards the river, and the river was derelict. All major cities were built around rivers, right? And so this is the Scioto River. It circles or does a U shape through downtown, and it's probably 3/4 of a mile long, and it was derelict. And now it's fully restored. 8 years into that Arena District development, the community was clamoring for a wildlife restoration, and the city started promoting that, and then the state helped. And now all these years later, it's extending all the way up into the Olentangy, all the way up to Ohio State University. So that's a regenerative thing. And it was all sparked by the downtown coming back and people moving there and wanting a wildlife riverscape. So good things happen. Sometimes you have to be really patient, though. The other thing, early in my career, district energy plants were popping up. Bill, I think you worked on one in Phoenix, right? But they don't always work out well, right? And I can't talk a lot about it right now, but I think for 4, 5, maybe 6 projects, over the last 20 years, district energy wasn't making any sense for these big event centers because of their power draw when events are on are so huge, and then when the event's over, there's no power need at all. And so it really wasn't a good fit for district energy. And now we've got people really thinking hard about that and drawing a bigger circle for these district energy reaches. And we're seeing district energy being more effective. And so we're hopeful that, hopefully what's powering that district energy are renewable sources and not coal. But we're seeing that the types of buildings that we work on are now being plugged into a more sustainable energy model, which is good. It's about time, right?
3 quick things on tourism. One, I think it's very important that whatever happens integrates into the bike lanes, and bike lanes and tourism is already a big story in many cities because of e-bikes now, and disproportionately those that have the means to travel are really love e-bikes and what that means in terms of mobility. So the ability to rent a bike, whether it's for an hour or an afternoon, and you go to River Landing, you go to the Bessboro, or you go to the university or Broadway, and you be able to go around the downtown and be able to do that. E-bikes is a game changer in the tourism industry, as you well know. So I think whatever happens for us in terms of planning it's really critical. We think about bike lanes and we think about accessibility. That's really critical. The second thing is, what we know from the Singapore story of tourism is that Singapore had the world's best airline, but it didn't mean anything for tourism. And so for those that don't know the Singapore tourism story, it was one of the busiest airports and everyone was flying in and out of Singapore, but nobody was getting off the plane and actually seeing Singapore. So they had a strategy, which was, now that we live in the Instagram era, they said, well, we need to create enough Instagram-worthy moments and enough of them that it would take 2 to 4 days to see all the Instagram-worthy moments. And if we do that and we keep promoting it, and we get a lot of influencers on Instagram, then we'll be kind of trending, and we'll be able to get people to get off the plane, and we're a city state and get to spend some time here. And so to me, and they did that. And now if you look at the before and after pictures of Singapore, and if you Google images of Singapore, you'll see a plethora now of really exciting things they've now done that are literally built with reverse engineering it from what's going to get the most hits and likes on Instagram backwards. And so to me, when I think about tourism, it's how do you create those kind of experiences? How do you create those places? How do you create that architecture that's going to be Instagram worthy, and having enough of those that you could string together that you can get a couple days of additional tourism. And the last thing I was going to say on it that I think is, Edmonton started it, and we were in our infancy of doing it. And I think there's an opportunity with projects like this to do it. Is that I'm a really big believer that if you go to Germany, you expect to hear German. You expect to see German architectural vernacular when you go to Bavaria. I'm Irish, and I came to Canada when I was a little boy, and when I go to Ireland to visit my relatives, I expect to see Gaelic signs, which are horrible 20 syllables long and make no sense. So thank God they've got the English in small font underneath, so you can see what it really is. But nevertheless, I love it because it's of a place, as opposed to going to a place that's the geography of nowhere. It's the geography of somewhere. And I think what I think is so important, because both Edmonton, and as a prairie kid, Edmonton and Saskatoon are both Treaty 6, and I would love places like Saskatoon, Edmonton to get to a point. You see this with a little bit with the Maori culture in New Zealand, where you go there and then you go to New Zealand, and now you expect to hear a few words of Maori. You get to understand a little bit of the Maori culture. Somebody should be able to come here as a tourist from Germany or Kansas City and be able to leave a place like Edmonton or Saskatoon and know a few words of Cree at the end of it, know a few phrases in it. You don't have to be an expert in it, but just to have some exposure. Just like when you go to Mexico on vacation, maybe all you do is know how to order a beer in Spanish, but you get a little bit of exposure to Spanish and you come away knowing a few words. I think it's very important when we think about reconciliation. People should be able to come here and know a little bit about the thing that's very unique. The thing that makes tourism special in a place like Edmonton or Saskatoon is our Indigenous culture. And it's not one of we have a plethora of cultures here, but it's the first culture. And it's something that is of a place that you can't go to Germany and learn about Cree culture. You can't go to Iceland or Japan and learn about the Dene or the Dakota Sioux, but you can here. And so we need to tell those stories. We need to embrace some of the words. We need to think about the architectural vernacular of this place and develop an architectural vernacular that reflects the fact that we're a northern city, and reflect a little bit of our story and start to tell our stories and how we build the city in the built form, and in how we start to name things and the type of art we use to tell our story and to have that culture and to embrace that culture and make it part of our collective culture, because it's what makes us unique and different than a place like Ireland or Kansas City, is to be able to do that. And I think it's a huge opportunity. I think projects like this, if we do it well, can hopefully take a couple baby steps in that direction.
My question is to the person that designed and made Rogers Place in Edmonton what it is now. Was that yourself?
Scott and I were involved.
Okay. With me going to Sastel Center, sitting down to watch a hockey game there, going to Belcher Place, sitting down watching a hockey game there, or an awards grade 12 graduation, going to Mosaic Stadium to watch the Riders play. I had no problem sitting in the chair, or the seats, I should say, pardon me, But in Rogers Place, when I went to see the Pittsburgh Penguins with our three sons against the Edmonton Oilers, none of us had any leg room where we sat. So I want to know why the designs of the other arenas, buildings, had that knee space, but not Rogers Place. And we were, if I remember correct, we were behind the Oilers, well, for 2 periods, the Oilers goalie, about 14 rows up. So we're like in the lower bowl, I guess. So how was that designed that we could not sit properly with our knees?
I can't explain it, but that's a mistake.
Well, I'm just saying, I said to our oldest son, what the hell is going on here? And he says, well, you need space for 3 more seats. And I said, well, I'm not comfortable. Are you comfortable? No. And then to the other 2, no. So the boys wanted to take me again on my birthday to see the Oilers. And I said, no way. I just don't enjoy it.
So today, we had a deep dive breakout session with the arena team and Dan, and we talked about that. And we talked about the trends in these arenas and the need for more tread space and wider chairs. And that's a very real conversation. And
Got a great example right here.
got a great example.
I know this is a theater setting, but there's spaces. Why cram in? I don't know how many billions or whatever it costs to make Rogers Place, but surely you can look at their CAD or whatever you guys put on your computers to design this particular seating situation and not take that into consideration.
We do take it into consideration. It's not unlike the airlines. If anyone has been flying lately, you'll see that the cabins are getting more cramped and you have less and less knee room. These are business decisions by the arena owners and operators. So yeah, we have beautiful design products and computer algorithms that can do perfectly comfortable seating situations. Not all clients choose to do that. And I'll just leave it at that. These are tough decisions.
So it's bottom line.
A client a long time ago, we had worked together a long time. I was in Columbus for 14 years working on that arena district and got to know the developer really, really well. And after 10 years, he called me and he said, hey, Scott, I've just had an epiphany. You got to come see me. And I met up with him and I said, Brian, what's going on? And he goes, I just realized something. I want to make sure you know this. I've just realized I've never made a design decision. As long as we've worked together on all these buildings in the arena district, I've never made a design decision. And I want you to know that. So the next time you come to me, don't present me designs, present me business choices, because I've realized that's all I do every day. I don't make legal decisions. I don't make design decisions. He said the only decisions he makes are business decisions. And it was like a moment of honesty. And he wanted his design team to know that. And we shouldn't go to him as designers, but we should go to him with these business propositions. And that stuck with me. And we do that. We will help Dan and the project team understand what it means to tighten things up and create less leg room. You do get to the point where things tip, and it may be a minority, it may be a majority, but things do tip, and you do hear comments like this. And it's no different than, are we designing for first day costs or long-term, ROIs? And these are, we're just starting. This is our first few days here. These are the kind of things that we deal with, and there are hundreds and thousands of decisions that need to be made. But they all add up to measures of success. And there are all kinds of measures of success, and this is one of them, comfort. I can't defend it. I'm sorry you had a poor
Well,
experience at Rogers Place.
I'm just saying what happened.
I understand.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jack McGonigal. I have a two-part question, I guess it is, mostly directed towards the city. So I've lived in Saskatoon, almost 60 years. Been driving 45, maybe a little bit more than that. One thing that I've noticed in our city, which I love, and again, I'm really happy and excited about this arena going downtown. It's going to be great for our city. But one thing that I deal with on a regular basis is traffic flow or the lack thereof. So my one question is, how are we going to continue a flow when events are on in the downtown area? How are we going to get people in and out quickly, safely? My other question, and I don't know, maybe we should answer, I guess, that question first, and then I can ask a second question.
Great. Oh, that's a gret question, and I'm sure Simon might want to add something in about the Edmonton experience, which is very similar to some of the concerns we hear the concerns. Pre-COVID, downtown employed 18 to 20,000 people in the downtown, in and out every day during the morning and afternoon rush. So the road network is set up to handle the kind of traffic we're talking about coming to events, which are primarily in the evenings, after after the workday is done for many people who work downtown. So the capacity is there, and not just moving that traffic in and out, but also parking. A lot of those people. It's not to say that we're not doing more work to address that, but part of the work that our technical team here will be doing, and we did a deep dive on it yesterday, was talking about mobility and parking and how we're gonna look at that. The interesting thing with bus rapid transit coming as kind of part of the overall umbrella of this project is it's not to try and force people to take transit if that's not a mode that they're willing to take, but it's to give people options. If you want to go downtown and have a few beers, enjoy an event, and you know maybe you don't want to take a taxi, drive home safe though, and maybe the transit's an option for you if you so choose. So with moving downtown, paying for parking, taking advantage of carpooling with friends. It's very typical in other cities. If you're going to a big event, you rarely, I think, if ever, go by yourself in your own personal vehicle. Just you hop in with friends and then go join an event. So more work to do on it for sure, but I think less of a concern, especially when you hear like Simon's comments about the Edmonton experience.
So for Edmonton, we had a lot of anxiety and stress about parking and transportation. Everyone was fearful that if we put the arena in the downtown and then all the new development that would go in the downtown, that it would be that things wouldn't work that well. And the Oilers were also worried because 30-40% of their ticket base lived more than 100 kilometers outside of Edmonton. So they were also worried about retention of their season ticket base if they have to drive another 20 or 30 minutes into the heart of the city, and would they lose those season ticket holders if they have to go a little bit further. And some of them live here in Saskatoon, some of them live in Grand Prairie and Fort Mac and Red Deer and all over the place. And they're worried about it. And also things like, downtown had a lot of underground parking. Could you fit a truck in underground parking and have the clearance to be able to get there and be able to do that? So there's all these fears and all these anxieties we had about retention of the season ticket holder base. Will they come downtown? How's parking going to handle? How's mobility going to happen? Well, it turned out that it was much ado about nothing, and we were in an Edmonton experience. None of the fears and anxieties we had came to bear because the city was set up that has thousands of students that are going to school downtown. There's tens of thousands of people that work downtown. And so if downtown can handle, although it gets congested, downtown can handle movement of that volume of people. So an arena was actually not that bad in terms of, even on a full night with Garth Brooks playing or something, or the Oilers with a sold out crowd, it was not that bad, the traffic relative to what the AM and PM rush was in terms of people coming to and from the downtown. And same thing with parking. The parking ended up being better than we thought for a few reasons. People went together to games to avoid parking costs, or maybe they took a short Uber ride, or they took transit. Some people certainly paid for parking. But the other thing we found out was that, Edmonton is, and Saskatoon probably has a bit of this too. People, there's a lot of people, including me, if you talk to my wife, who is, I'm on the cheap side of things, as my wife often tells me. And I sometimes walk 20 minutes to save myself $5 for parking because I'm cheap that way. And people in Edmonton did that. And so there are folks that were, even in minus whatever, would walk 20 minutes to avoid paying a little bit of money for parking. And that happened all the time. And some people certainly paid full freight to park really close. But it was everything in between. So parking did not turn out to be the issue that we thought it would be. Traffic didn't turn out to be the issue we thought it would be. And the other last comment I'd make about it is that when we're tourists and we go traveling around the world and we see different cities and city centers and different downtowns, the measurement of success is not being able to fire a cannonball down the street at 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. The measurement of success is actually, if the sidewalks are a little crowded and there's congestion on the streets, that's a sign of success, not failure. And so successful city centers are vibrant and are busy, and they're not places you can go 50 kilometers an hour through. They're places, the most successful places, sometimes you have to get through at 10, 20, 30 kilometers an hour because they're busy and there's lots of stuff going on. So that's kind of a measurement of success, not failure, when it comes to economic vitality and having a vibrant, successful downtown. You said you had two parts.
Yeah. So again, just back to that same thing. As it is now in the city, it's a sort of a intersection, red light to next intersection, red light. That to me doesn't allow for flow in the city. So again, if you're sitting at red lights and you're just moving to the next red light, it doesn't create a flow of that traffic wanting to get home. If that's what they want to do, they want to, get out of the downtown, get home. The way the city's set up right now, it doesn't work. There is no flow.
Yeah, thanks for the question. A couple things. As part of this, yes, we'll be looking at the traffic signal timing throughout the downtown. Most all of the intersections in downtown are signalized, which again makes it ideal for moving large volumes of traffic and dealing with the safety issues of pedestrians crossing and that type of thing. With the bus rapid transit system, though, as well, 25th Street, 1st Avenue, 22nd Street, and Broadway Ave, the whole BRT network system will also be outfitted with an intelligent transportation system, which will also help more proactively and intelligently control the signal timings along those corridors as well, not just for buses, but for all modes of traffic, including emergency vehicles that may need to travel those routes. But I appreciate your comments.
Okay. No, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. So my second question is, when the citizens of Saskatoon were asked the location of the new arena, and the final location was decided on, the Midtown parking lot, basically. I don't recall seeing it being said that the city was going to have to purchase other buildings downtown to make this happen. They showed the arena and its location, but they didn't actually talk about, we need to purchase this building and that building. And so I'm wondering why this is a better location than down by the police station.
This we can't control what ends up getting picked up in media or social media. We generate administratively, we generate our reports to council and do our best to try and push out information. But sometimes not everything we share gets fully dispersed out to the public. The police station site's not vacant. There is, all of our public works operations are located between 25th Street and 33rd Street in that area of downtown. Relocating those is not free. So while we do own the land, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in costs to relocate those operations to new facilities. And while that is a long-term goal of the city, is to move those operations out of the downtown core to new locations in the far reaches of the city. That's a major investment that would be added on over and above. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well. We did signal in our report that we were working on additional land acquisitions. We were in the middle of, we don't typically try to sour negotiations for land purchases until they're complete. So that's why we don't typically fully report out until those are complete. The Midtown Plaza site, we did confirm would work as is for a north-south orientation of the arena. It's big enough, but it doesn't provide a sufficient space for some of these other amenities that Simon was talking about here. It would end up being a little bit more like the MTS Center in Winnipeg, built solid and tight right to the street, right? So you don't have a lot of place to create public plaza space or green space or other things. You need other land to do that in other areas. Plus, we've heard through a lot of the work we've done in some of the people we've talked to is sun exposure is important. Simon has a nice anecdote that if it might be minus 15, but if there's no wind and the sun's out, like it was this morning, it actually feels like a pretty nice day out there. So having sun exposure comes into play, and protection from the wind. So when our wind comes from the northwest and the sun comes from the south, having a south or southwestern exposure is advantageous for a main entrance. So we worked on additional land acquisitions and council ultimately approved them. That would allow us the space to actually turn the orientation of the arena potentially. We're still looking at finally our options on what this would look like, but this would give us the space to turn the arena east-west and create a whole bunch of area for public space around the building. Not just for programming of viewing parties or New Year's Eve events or food truck wars or whatever that may be, but to circulate people through the site. We still want to make sure that traffic on the streets can move without being overly impaired, and people who are using the sidewalk who are not attending an event aren't impacted by people queuing up to enter a building. And we want to make sure the bus riders on the BRT routes are also not overly impacted. We want to make sure everybody's thought of, not just the people attending an event.
The only comment I would add to that would be, I think it's a best practice. I think if the city has the means to do it, and some cities do and some cities don't, I would encourage cities to assemble as much land as you possibly can, because then you have more agency and control over what happens ultimately with that land. And so the larger land banking there really is and land holdings, then the city can be the steward of that land and make sure it gets built to the highest and best use that's most complementary to the ultimate outcome that the city desires, which is a vibrant, successful downtown with thousands of people living, working, playing, and studying in it. And the city can control that and make sure that you don't have too many land speculators in it that are sterilizing land, and to make sure that it can be optimized. They can see that land developed and then sold, but then add conditions that public realm improvements have to go in as part of the land deal to do it. And because what the city can do that a private sector developer can't do is say, we don't necessarily have to make a profit, like a gigantic profit. We buy it for X and sell it for Y. But what the city can do is get the tax revenue that comes from seeing it go from a gravel parking lot to a 6-story building one day. And the long-term play is the fact the city went from getting $15,000 a year in property tax revenue to $400,000 a year in property tax revenue in perpetuity. And so the city gains enormously just from just money balling it, and how much more money the city can make for tax revenue in the long term. Being able to do that and control that is in the long term economic interest of the city to be able to do it. And that's how you get not just a successful downtown, that's how you simply make a lot of money for the city so that taxes don't have to go up as high in the suburbs.
We are like way over time. I have people in the queue. I'm gonna allow 2 more. Okay, 3. No, does anyone need to go to bed tonight? No. Okay.
I'm retired. Who cares?
I think this person is in line next. Okay.
Just the one. What happens to the Sastel place then? Like out, like what? Like if we're going to put everything downtown, what happens to that? Is it going to be rented out for people to ice skate, or what is it? What
It's a great question, and a decision point council we will be presented with in the coming months. Thanks for asking that, because it does come up. There's been no decision yet on the future. We are tasked, and the technical advisor team will be looking at it, with looking at options for what's called adaptive reuse, which is just a fancy word for saying what else can we use it for. Obviously, we don't want to sell the facility willy-nilly and have a competitor hosting concerts in there that would then compete with this nice new arena we've built, and that we're trying to generate business for. So there are other cities who've done different things. Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto has done some interesting things with theirs. But keep in mind, this is a suburban arena, and in the most expensive sheet of ice we have in town. And without some investment to create some other opportunities in there, it's a very expensive facility to operate. So we're going to do a deep dive. Scott's already tasked with it, and I have little doubt every project he's involved, like this one, where they're looking at building new, involves looking at what to do with the old. It's something every city like ours is dealing with. So watch for more in the next few months on that, including what we're going to do with regard to the convention center. There's an open question yet whether we build new or whether we expand TCU Place, what those options might look like. And we've spent a lot of time, 4 hours today, I think, talking about that and what some preliminary conversations there.
Thank you. Now, I don't envy your position. It'd be a lot like being somebody trying to sell a refrigerator to Eskimos. We're going through a recession in our country. And what you showed me there tonight, when I see all of that, I see an incredible amount of money being involved in that development. Maybe we could have avoided this when they sent out the first thing about where should the new arena, whatever, be. Maybe they should have included a simple one on there. Do you feel the city can afford it? Can the people afford this? That should have been on there as an option.
Sure, and Councillor Block spoke to this in her opening comments. City Council's been clear in their resolution when we start, one of the more recent decision points back in April of 2021. We're looking at funding plans that will involve no additional burden on property taxes. So things like tax increment financing, which is simply using the uplift from new development, so that incremental increase in property tax we get will go back to pay for this. That has no impact on your property taxes. Using things like alternative taxes, like bed taxes for hotel rooms for stays for people who may be coming to a convention here and sitting in our city. It's very common in many other cities to pay for an accommodation tax like that. So these are some of the tools we're looking at. There's more decisions to be made yet, but the goal is to bring back a conceptual design with a cost estimate and a funding plan to City Council to show how they can pay for it. And then City Council can make some decisions. Our marching orders were little or no increase to property taxes with the funding plan on this. So in your points about a recession, this isn't about invest in this or do nothing. The existing facility is starting to lose ground. We are starting to be less competitive in the concert field. So the question is, 10 years from now, and this is not 2 years off, we're going to open the new arena, but in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, do you want your kids to be able to enjoy, or your grandkids or your great-grandkids or your nieces and nephews to enjoy the events that come and are hosted at SaskTel Center? Because if we don't make an investment, even if you didn't want it downtown, the existing facility would require investment. City Council back in 2018.
It's how this comes about. Again, if you'd have put that on the first question period, because again, we have probably, arguably, one of the most least effective city councils presently running. Now, the thing is, if I was in Edmonton have family that lives right downtown, just up from the arena center. And they built these towers, and it was wonderful. Now they had gardens downtown, open markets. It's wonderful for them. But those get picked up in the evening. You don't go down, they don't go downtown. They don't walk down out of their apartments into those streets because there's all kinds of crap happening there. So they have to stay upstairs until morning when everything clears out. Our economy, I'm afraid that we're heading to, I hope we're not heading into this because, we want to be the best on the block. That can cost a lot of money, and there's a lot of people that are seriously hurting at this point in time who won't be able to afford to walk into that and pay for those events. So unless you're going to be a charitable organization, I don't know it just has to come about in a very open way. And I don't seriously think that our time, when our province is basically at war with our federal government on our resources, we're resource heavy, we're a rich place, but we've got our hands tied right now. And this may not be the time. And if it isn't the time, we still have an arena, we still have the buildings. Life will go on. But taxes can't continue creep.
Fair enough.
Thank
you for
you.
your comments, sir. Okay.
Hi. Yeah. I guess I'm the last question, so it's nice to see lots of people that have turned out. I wish there was more. But thanks for taking the time to have this session. Wanted to build on one of the slides that you had that kind of talked about community benefits and community benefit agreements. And if you could kind of get a little bit into a discussion about where some of those may have been put in place with other districts such as this. And what I mean by community benefits agreements is like, how might we utilize this to leverage things like affordable housing, addressing homelessness, looking at poverty reduction, because those are a lot of the things that I know that other arenas have tried to, like other arena districts have tried to address. So respecting the gentleman that just spoke is like, how do we build kind of a financial model that looks at things like creating jobs, creating training, addressing some of those things and putting in housing, because that's been one of the targets for the downtown that we're missing. And so could something like this, and I just want to speak to the experience of the panel members here, based on tonight being a best practices and examples from elsewhere, if you could speak to where there might be some of that examples and how you were able to draw in an arena district into addressing some of those issues. Thanks.
I would say whatever happens has to be bespoke to Saskatoon. It can't be, we can't borrow what other cities do. It has to be kind of unique to this place. I would add every single arena and arena district project is quite different, and part of it's because of the ownership is different. So some were a public-private partnership like Edmonton between the Cates Group and the City of Edmonton. This one is a city-owned facility and will be a city-owned facility and city-led, so it's very different. It's led by the public sector, not the joint venture between the public and private. Some of them are 100% led by the private sector, and so there's different. So it's and sometimes when it's been what I think heavily influenced even the conversation around community benefits in Edmonton, quite frankly, from a social license perspective, was the time that we were doing the early days of that project was the same time you had the Wall Street sit-in with the 1%, 99% conversation happening, and then you had the narrative in Edmonton was a billionaire wants to have a hockey team built with public dollars to pay for millionaire athletes, and that was the narrative in Edmonton. And so with that type of environment also created a conversation about, well, there needs to be significant benefits and so forth. Now, what the public didn't fully appreciate is because it was not the means to kind of pay for building the arena was to some it seemed convoluted. To those that are in the arena business, it's kind of straightforward because there's a bunch of different tools and some of them were just mentioned in terms of different things that can be used to help pay for arenas and how you do them. Ultimately, kind of went through the test, and it kind of passed. I think it was unanimous at the end of the day. So it went from a period of time in the early days where I think the majority of council was offside with building the ice district in Edmonton, and by the end of it, I think it was unanimous. Maybe there was one dissenter, but it was either 13-0 or it was a 12-1 vote at the end of the day to do the deal. And I can tell you that that the community benefit was part of it, but part of it was also wasn't just about some of the immediate benefits in terms of the jobs and the other things. Part of it was about city building and civic pride, and what do we want with the downtown, and what do we want the downtown to be, and what do we want it not to be. Community benefits is definitely one of the factors in there, but it wasn't exclusive by any means. But there's a whole range of thing that could happen in terms of public consultation, engagement, public art, affordable housing, and other things. But I'd also but projects like this are not a one and done. You don't build it and you're done. It should never be that. In fact, what you're really doing is committing to 20, 30 years of city building and building out the district, and to build the amount of housing. And Saskatoon's not a place where you're going to get all of a sudden 10,000 housing starts a year in the downtown. That's just not going to happen. You know, success in downtown Saskatoon might be getting 300 to 500 housing units starting in the downtown, but over the span of a decade or two, that adds up to being thousands of units of housing and a lot more vibrancy. So we're talking about city building that's not overnight, but really city building over a generation, and it's about the cumulative effects of all these incremental gains in housing and city building, and then that generates revenue, which gives the city more means to do more affordable housing, do more public art, do more amenities. So I don't think it's about I think we have to have those conversations, but I don't think it's not exclusive to just the arena or theater or convention center. It's about what do we want the downtown and this district to be. Sorry, I think we're about to get the cane and get pulled off stage.
Thank you all very much. I am going to just use a quick opportunity to thank you all for the questions that you have, and to ask you to keep asking. The website is saskatoon.ca/downtown. You can probably get a whole bunch of your questions answered there, but also please feel free to reach out to me and the rest of council if you have further questions. I just wanted to say a couple of things, about, whether or not we should actually proceed with this. I mean, the honest answer is we don't know. I don't know how I would vote because I don't have enough information. All I know is that as we have been going through this process over the last 5 or 6 years, with every new piece of information that we received, it was another step forward. And it was another step forward. We got a green light because we had this question answered, but we don't have all of the answers yet. We don't know what our community wants to see in that space, and critically, we don't have a funding plan. We have ideas of a funding plan, but we don't know where the money is actually coming from yet. We have ideas, but not a full plan. So I think that it's just important to underscore that we're all in this together. And very frankly, I am personally worried about what we do if we don't go forward with this. And that's similar to what I said at the very beginning. Not only are there costs to the facilities that are aging and have a law of diminishing returns in terms of their ability to generate revenue, but we have a city that is in a situation where we are growing in a way that we are becoming an increasingly inefficient city. For every meter of pipe and sidewalk and roadway that we add to the outside of the city, we simply become more expensive. If we're able to drive it into the core, we have an opportunity to look forward to a city that is more efficient and more sustainable, both economically and environmentally. So those are my comments, but I just wanted to say huge thanks to Scott, Brian, Simon, and Dan. We will hopefully be hearing a whole pile more from them in the days and weeks and months and years ahead. And again, just thank you so much for being with us tonight. And please, let's continue this conversation. And very much looking forward to the pieces that everyone are interested in, and to make sure that those are included in the district and in our downtown as we go forward. Thank you.